Okay. Perfect. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second Landcare Builds Skills for 2025. If we haven't met before, my name's Eve. I'm the Member Services Manager here at Waln. I'm currently working on Wodjuk country, and it's a beautiful, blooming sunny day here, as we were just discussing. The first of our everlastings in the garden have actually just popped open, which is really exciting. I'd love to extend a welcome to Vanessa Slatyer from Waln. Thanks for joining us. Oh, so today we'll be discussing one of the many apps in the environmental sector that will be able to add value to the incredible work that everyone's doing on the ground as Landcare groups. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on Wodjuk Noongar Boodja. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend a deep respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders on the call today. And I acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, sea, and sky as the world's oldest continuing culture. So please feel free to acknowledge what country you are on in the chat function. So let's jump in. Thomas is a botanist at the University of New South Wales and the National Herbarium of New South Wales and Sydney. He is an iNaturalist curator and an administrator for iNaturalist Australia and regularly organises and leads bioblitzes around Australia. Thomas has visited WA 5 times to photograph plants and is always planning the next trip. I feel you, Thomas. Can't get enough of it. Juliet has over 8 years of experience in the environmental sector, specialising in environmental communication and education. She's planned and executed programs spanning a variety of participants, including Kindy Tier 12s, university and vocational education students, and community programs. She's currently working with the Atlas of Living Australia, who specialise in providing public access to a plethora of data on Australian biodiversity, which can then be used to enhance research, outcomes, and decision making. And Cam has over 30 years of experience working on science and biodiversity issues in government, conservation, and the collection sector. He is the program lead for taxonomy for the Atlas of Australia and the program manager for National Biodiversity Data Initiatives at CSIRO. He has experience in leading teams through change, policy development, liaison, negotiating difficult outcomes, and developing innovative solutions to issues by harnessing different sectors in collaborative partnerships. So I'm going to hand over to Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries, it's my pleasure. Juliet and Cam, did you want to hop in with anything before I started?
No, we'll leave everybody in the hands of your awesomeness, Thomas.
Hopefully. All right, so as a precursor for this for everyone, I like to say this in all of my workshops, iNaturalist is available as both a mobile phone app and also as a desktop version. And all of the tools and functionality that I'm going to go through now relates to the desktop version. I personally always advise people to use the desktop version because that's where all the most powerful functionality exists. The app is of course handy, particularly if you are out in the field, and it's very convenient to use in the field. But of course, you aren't always going to have internet service when you're out and about. Many people take images with a camera rather than their mobile phone. And there is lots of functionality that exists on the desktop version that does not exist on the mobile phone app. So everything I'm saying here applies to the desktop, but most of the principles I talk about can be relatively easily transferred to the mobile app if you do use that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to use iNat Live in front of you. Please feel free to interrupt at any time whatsoever to ask questions, whether that's popping it into the chat, which I'll monitor, or just unmuting and asking. That's completely fine. And if you want me to repeat anything, I was going through too fast, please let me know. And I'll basically run through 4 things today. One is I'll just do a basic tutorial on how to upload your records, which obviously is kind of the fundamental thing that most people will be doing. I'll talk about how to explore the data and look at other people's data that they have uploaded so that you can use that to inform your own searching and your own surveys and work. I'll talk a little bit about projects and how they're a really powerful tool within the platform to organize your data. And then at the end, I'll also go through a little bit of a how-to tutorial on what to take photos of across different taxa to maximize the quality of your data and maximize the probability that your records can get identified. So I will go ahead and share my screen. So for anyone who hasn't created an account yet, it is very quick and free. All you need is a username, which can be completely anonymized if you want. You don't need to provide your real name. And then you can pretty much just dive straight in. So it's very simple. So once you have created your account, you have your username, and you're in your home screen, what you want to do is there's a big green upload button at the top right-hand corner. Because remembering the fundamental unit of iNaturalist is an observation. And an observation is just you go out and you encounter any kind of organism. So iNaturalist is taxon agnostic. It can cover literally everything from not only all the usual suspects like birds and fungi and insects and plants, but viruses, bacteria, you name it. If it is alive, or I guess debatably alive in the case of viruses, it is all fair game. So we'll go ahead and click that green upload button. And then you've got a couple of options. You can either drag and drop from a Windows Explorer screen, or you can just go ahead and pick the blue choose files button. And I noticed that Cam already answered your question, but I can corroborate that as well. I've used it with Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Opera, and it seems to work fine with all of them. So what I'll do is I've got my photos already in a Windows Explorer file here. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the Shift key on my keyboard and highlight all my photos. And I will just physically drag and drop them into the screen here. So just a really nice quick way of doing things. Now you notice here at the moment, I just put 83 different images into the upload screen. And in the top right-hand corner, you'll see the green button, which says submit 83 observations. Now the important thing is that if you take multiple photographs of the same organism at the same time, they need to be combined into one record. So taking multiple photos of the same thing is fantastic. It's highly recommended, of course, to maximize identifiability, especially for groups like plants or insects. But if I go ahead and take 5 photographs of a plant, they need to be all combined into the same individual record. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that new users to iNaturalist stumble over, is they'll go ahead and they'll take 5 or 6 photographs of a plant, which is great, but then they'll upload those as 5 separate observations. And on the flip side of that coin, if you are taking photographs of multiple species, they need to be uploaded as separate observations. So that's another one of the kind of traps that new users can fall into, is that they'll say, go ahead and photograph 5 different birds, and then they'll put all 5 of those photos into the same record, whereas they need to be split up. Now, it's very, very simple to combine photographs in this screen. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. So one of them is just picking up and manually dragging and dropping. So let's say we'll start off with this photograph here. So here's a plant that I photographed earlier this week up in northern New South Wales when I was doing some field work. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 photographs of that plant. So I want to combine them all into one. Whichever one I want to appear first, I don't touch that. So let's say this top left-hand corner one, I want that to appear first. All I got to do is pick up the other ones and then drag them onto that first one. And you'll see it's now being combined and it says 1 out of 2. So I can just pick up each of these and just manually drop them. And you can see I've now combined 7 photographs into one observation, nice and quick and simple. Alternatively, I can use the combine button. So let's say we start with this one. So here's a gonocarpus that I photographed. Again, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 photographs of it. So what I'll do is I will click the first one. You'll see it's now been outlined in green. I'll then hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, and then I'll click the last one. You'll see they're all now outlined in green. And then I can just go ahead and click the blue combine button at the top left. And the same thing happens. They're all combined. Now, the only other way to do it is if you want to appear want them to appear non-consecutively. So let's say, okay, now I'm dealing with this Allocasuarina, and I've got quite a lot of photos of this, but I don't necessarily want them to appear as photo 1, photo 2, photo 3, so on and so forth. What I do here is, so let's say I want this particular one to appear as the first photo. I would click that as normal. Then instead of holding down the Shift key, I'll hold down the Control key on my keyboard, and I can click photos that are non-consecutive. And you can see those are now outlined in green. can click combine, and you'll see those have now been combined. And then I can combine that with dragging and dropping, or hold down shift, combine them. So you can hold down control to combine photos that are non-consecutive, hold down shift to combine ones that are consecutive. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly combine the rest of these. And we'll compress all of those photos down into a small set of records. And the other thing you'll notice here while I'm doing that about the desktop uploader is you can upload large numbers of photos at the same time. So when you're on your phone, you're obviously relatively restricted to how many photographs you can upload at once. Whereas if you're like me and you've been out on a big field day, sometimes I will take anywhere up to 2,500 photos in a day. And so if you've got lots of photos, it's a far more efficient use of your time to do it via the desktop, because I will regularly upload batches of 50 to 100 photographs. I wouldn't advise uploading more than 100 photographs at once. The uploader tends to slow down a little bit, but anywhere between 1 to 100 is generally completely fine. So you can see I've now collapsed those 83 photographs down into 13 observations. And now for each of these observations, there are 3 main important pieces of metadata. You've got the identification, which is where it says species name. You've got the date and time, and you've got the location. Now, 99.9% of the time, the date and time should be automatically filled out. Whether you're taking photographs with a camera or a smartphone, it is almost always automatically embedded, that metadata. If for some reason it isn't, so for example, sometimes if you send a photo to yourself via social media or a messaging service and then download it to a computer, that will sometimes strip the metadata. If the date and time are missing or they're wrong and you need to amend them, very simple, you just click in that bar and a little calendar will pop up, and then you can just page through the calendar, pick the date and time that you want. You don't need the time, so you can actually delete the time. As long as you have the date, that is completely fine. In terms of the location, it's pretty similar. If you are taking a photograph with your phone and you have location services turned on, then the location and the coordinates should be automatically embedded. If you are taking photos with a camera, however, not all cameras nowadays have geotagging in them. There's a couple of options you can do. One is you can download a geotagger, or if you have a GPS app, which you can record a GPS trail and then associate them with your photos, or you can manually input it. So I can show you how to do both of those. So the thing that I use is I actually have an app on my phone called Geotag Photos Pro 2, which basically I go out on my walk, I just click start on the app, and it automatically starts tracking my position for the entire walk. All I have to do is make sure that before I click start, the time on my camera is matched exactly to the time on my phone. And then when I get home, I just tell the software which photo folder to look in, and it automatically geotags all of my photos for me by matching the timestamps. So this is an app called Geotag Photos Pro 2. Costs about $20 to get the app. This is the one that I use. There are other options out there as well, so that there's multiple choices, but you get that on your phone and then you also get that on your computer. But if you don't have that, you can easily, again, manually put in the location. So you would just click in the location bar and you'll have a Google Maps screen pop up where you can obviously scroll in and out and you can navigate to somewhere on the map. So here I was at Barron Mountain in northern New South Wales on this trip. So you can search for locations. So I might say, okay, I saw this thing in Kalbarri, and then I can navigate around and I can find the point on the map where I saw that thing. Now, you'll notice when I click on the map, a red circle appears around my point. That is the coordinate uncertainty. So if you say, well, I know I saw this record just off Grey Street, but I wasn't entirely sure of where I was, you can grab the handles on the side of the circle and expand that to be as large or as small as you like until you believe it encompasses all the areas where you could have seen that record. You can also then type in location notes. These do not influence the coordinates. and you can type in whatever you like in those notes. So if you don't want to type in those notes, that's fine. Google Maps will automatically generate location notes for you, but I often find that the notes that are auto-generated are not always super informative. They tend to often be quite coarse. Like if I put up something from anywhere in Sydney, it'll often just say Sydney, which isn't tremendously useful. And then you just go ahead and click Update Observations, and that will update that location. One other thing with locations is you'll notice that there was another little drop down here, which relates to geoprivacy. And this is probably a question a lot of people have. There's 3 options. By default, all of your records will be open. This means that anyone can look at those observations at any time and see the exact coordinates and location that you made that observation at. Alternatively, you can set things to obscured or private. I'll talk about private first because that's the one that I highly recommend against using. Many people don't realize what this setting does. So often people will think, if I've taken a photo on private property, like say my own house in my backyard, I should set it to private. But private has a little bit of a idiosyncratic meaning in the iNaturalist ecosystem. What actually happens when you choose to set something to private is that all location information is destroyed from public view. So someone looking at your record will not even be able to see the continent that your record is made on. The true location will still be stored on your end, and you can still see the coordinates of your own record and a select few people that you can choose to trust with your hidden coordinates. But anyone else won't be able to see it. The ALA will never be able to access those coordinates. Your records will just straight up not go into the ALA. And so that can obviously greatly limit the ability of other people to identify your record if they don't know where it was made. The other option, however, is obscured, and this is the one that is used a lot. So what happens when you pick obscured? Your record, the coordinates will be randomly scrambled into a 0.2 degree latitude by 0.2 degree longitude box. So this box has a diagonal of roughly 30 kilometers, depending on how close to the equator you are, but it ends up being somewhere around 500 square kilometers. So it's quite a large degree of obscuration. It's much larger than what any of the states do. So for example, if you have P1, P2, P3, P4 plants in WA, they will get jittered and obscured at a level of 1, 2, 5, or 10 kilometers generally. So this is effectively a 30-kilometer jitter in essence. It's also randomized. It's not algorithmic. So you'll basically have that 0.2 by 0.2 degree box, and your true coordinates are somewhere inside that box, and then the randomly generated set of coordinates are also somewhere inside that box. So anyone viewing that record from the public who doesn't have trusted access to your hidden coordinates, they will just see the random set of coordinates and they'll see the box, and all they'll know is that your record is somewhere inside that box. So I can show you exactly what that looks like. And there are 2 ways that obscuration is applied. So one of them is automatically, and one of them is manually. So for all threatened species, so again, we'll use WA as an example, all P1, P2, P3, P4, threatened, migratory, and a few other category species in Western Australia, that is a big list that has been provided to the ALA by the Western Australian government. And that obscuration is then implemented on iNaturalist automatically. So we'll just use a Queensland example here. We've got greater glider is deemed a location-sensitive species in Queensland. So you'll notice that if I look on the map here, all I see is this box and then this big point in the box. So that point is the randomly generated coordinates, and all I know is that the true coordinates for this greater glider record are somewhere inside that box. As well as that, you'll notice that the fine level detail of the location has been removed, and it just says the state and the country. On top of that, the date and time get removed. So all I'll see is the month and the year. And then also any people who have added an identification to that record, their ID timestamp will also just show the month and the year. So all of those extra details actually get stripped out. Now that is done on an automatic basis for a lot of species. So if something is deemed to have sensitive locations, as soon as you upload a record of that to the system, it will just automatically be obscured by the system and you have no choice. And that can operate on a national level or a state level because, of course, sometimes species have different levels of sensitivity in different jurisdictions. It can also operate on a Shire equivalent level as well, but that tends to be a lot less common. You can also obscure things manually, however. So if, for example, say there's an orchid, a patch of orchids in your local reserve, that they're not formally listed as threatened, but you're a bit worried about them getting poached or collected if someone sees you put them up, you can also apply obscuration manually on individual records. So let's say I've got this gonocarpus and I'm really worried about someone collecting it or disturbing it. I can just go to that record, change it to obscured, update it, and it will apply the obscuration exactly like the automatic process would. So it's as simple as that. So it's very simple to do on your records. There are numerous observers that I know of out there that obscure all of their records. There are people that don't obscure any of their records. It is completely up to you. The only thing to keep in mind is that if you manually obscure your records, when they go into the ALA will never give out the true coordinates of manually obscured records. They will give out the coordinates to, trusted researchers and conservationists and land managers if they go through the right channels and request them for automatically obscured taxa. But for anything that you have manually obscured, they will not give the true coordinates out. It is still possible to get access to those true coordinates directly through iNaturalist by obviously contacting the observer, or there are a few other ways which I can show you. But those, it makes it a lot more difficult to access them because, of course, people manually obscure records, not only for disturbance and collecting reasons, but also for privacy reasons in some cases as well. The final piece of metadata is, of course, the species ID. And again, there's a couple of ways of going about this. But before I just dive into that, I'll take a quick look at the chat for some questions, although I see that Juliet and Cam have very helpfully been jumping in there. So thank you. So I'll leave that to them. So species ID. So for those of you who have never used iNat before, it has AI suggestions as an option that you can use. So any of you who have ever used something like Google Lens, for example, the computer vision model will suggest which species it thinks you have. Now, it is important, obviously, to take those suggestions with a grain of salt. For some particular groups of organisms, it is fantastic. For things like birds, common plants, many groups like butterflies or dragonflies, it is extremely good. And I use it in many cases just as a simple tool to save me having to type out the whole name. So if I photograph some kind of bird or common plant and I already know exactly what it is, I don't even have to bother typing it in. I'll just click into the bar and click on the AI suggestion, obviously making sure that it's correct first. But then obviously on the flip side of that, there are also many taxa for which the AI suggestions are very rubbish for various reasons, possibly because there are groups that are not very easily identified or identifiable at all from photographs, especially from photos that may have been taken with, say, a smartphone, or they're groups that the model doesn't know about. Because in order for a species to be suggested by the AI suggestions, it has to have at least 100 photographs that are already in iNaturalist. So for rarer species that have very few records, it is literally impossible for the AI to suggest those species correctly. But what it will, of course, do instead is suggest other visually similar species, which are but then, of course, wrong. So I can show you how this works. So let's start, for example, down here with this particular plant. So one that those of you on the West Coast may not recognize, this is Antarctic beech. This is Nothofagus morii, really beautiful species that grows in cool temperate rainforest in New South Wales. And let's see what happens. So all you have to do is click into the species name bar and a list of suggestions will be auto-populated and we can see what it says. And you can see in this case, it gets it straight away. So quite impressive, right? And there's a few things to notice here. So one is that it is often segregated into two different sections. So it will first have a section where it will say, we're pretty sure it is in this, and then it'll give a coarser level taxon, like a genus or a family. So here it's saying it's pretty sure it's in the genus Nothofagus, and Nothofagus has multiple species in it. Then it has its list of species suggestions. And here it goes, here's our top suggestions. Top one is Antarctic beech, and that is bang on, that is correct for this particular plant. Now, the fewer the suggestions here, the more confident it is. Now, again, it doesn't mean that it's correct. It just means that it is more confident of its suggestion. So if we do something like this one, for example, so this is some insect feeding marks on a rare eucalyptus on that mountain. Let's see what it says. You see it's got heaps of suggestions. So it's got basically the maximum number of suggestions. It's not confident at all. You can see most of these are plants. There's a couple of insect suggestions, but it's not really sure. So, and you'll notice as well that when it has a large number of suggestions like this, it actually doesn't have those 2 suggestions. So it no longer says that we're pretty sure. It just says we're not confident enough to make a recommendation, but here are our top suggestions. So my general piece of advice is if you see this message that says we're not confident enough to make a recommendation, I would always advise to not pick any of those suggestions. So what do you do if it says it's unsure and you want to pick things? Well, you can type in the name yourself. So you can easily at any point put in an identification at any taxonomic rank yourself. You are by no means obligated to choose any of the computer vision suggestions. You can enter IDs yourself. Now, if you know exactly what something is, again, that's perfectly fine. So here, for example, this one is Allocasuarina rigida, subspecies rigida. So I can just go ahead and type in that name. And you can see there'll be a little autocomplete text option, and I can just click on that, and that's totally fine. But let's say I've got one like this. Now, this is a Lepidosperma, and God knows which Lepidosperma it is. I've got no idea. But again, I can just go ahead and type in my ID at that courser rank, and I can select that, and that's completely fine. And to step that back even further with something like, say, this, where I have it's some kind of insect feeding damage on this eucalypt, but I have, well, presumably it's insect, but I've got no idea. Again, it's completely fine to put in just that course ID, and I can just select insects. You know, similarly for any of these, I can just type in plants, and that's totally fine. It is always much better to type in some kind of ID, no matter how coarse it is, rather than leaving the ID bar blank. And the reason for that is that many people who are identifying records on iNaturalist are explicitly searching for particular taxa. So if you photograph a plant, but you just leave the ID blank, then anyone who is searching for plants to ID will never see your record. And because of the sheer number of records that are being uploaded to the platform every day, so in Australia, there are 10,000 new records every single day being uploaded. Across the world, there are 200,000 records being added every single day. It can be very easy for your records to kind of get buried underneath the giant deluge coming in. And so if you do leave the ID blank, it's a lot easier for those to slip between the cracks and get lost. So always, it doesn't matter how silly you feel, you know, even if you were to ID something as animal, that is completely fine, and it's better than leaving it blank. So once you've filled in those 3 pieces of metadata, so we can go ahead and fill in all of these. This one is a Denhamia, but it's not that one. You can see it's pretty good. So this one is Elderberry panax. It gets it straight away. So this, I mean, like, for example, this is a good one to do as an example. So this is a Melaleuca. This is an endemic Melaleuca that is only found on Barren Mountain called Melaleuca tortifolia. But it only at the moment has 6 or 7 records on iNaturalist. So it doesn't have enough photos to be recognized and suggested by the model. So you'll notice that it says it's pretty sure it's in Melaleuca, which is correct. But then all the observations are other Melaleuca species. So in that case, that's an example of one where I would manually type in the name, and you can see, obviously, it doesn't recognize it. And whereas for the Allocasuarina, it actually does pick up rigida, and that's the top suggestion. It won't suggest infrataxa. So if you know something to subspecies or variety, you will have to type that in yourself. The only other thing I'll notice here is you will notice that these suggestions, they have colors on the side. This is actually a browser extension that I have. It's not an inbuilt element of iNaturalist, but someone built this extension, and it comes up with a traffic light system to tell you how confident the suggestions are. So for ones, you'll notice that are green, it's very confident. Whereas something like here, you'll notice that most of them are red or orange. And so there's very low confidence in those suggestions. So here, this is a good example where if I look at all the suggestions, it's a real variety of different things. It's clearly not any of them. They're all red. So I'm like, I'm just going to play it safe. And I'm just going to go to dicot or even something like flowering plant, and that's completely fine. But for a lot of these, it is pretty good at picking them up. So kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, kind of 10 out of these 13, it was able to get it to at least genus, if not down to species. So it's pretty impressive. Once you're done there, that is largely the basic requirements for uploading observations. The other thing you can also do is type in the notes section. So if you have additional information you wanted to include, perhaps something like population size or extra information about maybe smell or habitat or any kind of helpful information that you think may be useful for identifiers or people using the record, you can also include that in the notes section. One key last important thing here is that iNaturalist is fundamentally revolves around wild organisms. So you can upload records of planted individuals, so cultivated plants, for example, but you do need to mark them as such. So let's say this particular plant was a pot plant that I was nonetheless very interested in trying to identify because maybe I was doing a pollination study. I just go ahead over here, and where it says location is public, where it says captive cultivated, I just tick that box and it will mark it as captive cultivated. Now, it will mean that it becomes a casual grade. And so it kind of gets removed from the main pool of records and doesn't get shown on default maps, but people can still find the record and identify it for you. The only last little bit here before I move on to the next thing is you can also add records without any form of media. Now, again, these will only qualify as casual grade. They will never be able to go into the ALA. They don't appear on default maps, but let's say that you were doing a survey on your property and you were interested in keeping a personal list of every species you've encountered, and maybe you saw a bird that you were able to identify by sight, but you didn't get a photo. You can just go ahead and click this add button in the top left-hand corner, and then you can go observation without media, and it just creates a blank template. And you'll have to fill out the date and the location manually, but you can just go ahead and you can fill out that particular record. And that's totally fine. And so pretty simple to do, but it's just a way of allowing you to also input records that you don't necessarily have supporting evidence in the form of photos or audio recordings for. So pretty straightforward on that particular screen. It's an efficient way of uploading all of your records. You can then just go ahead and click submit, and that will submit all of your records. And then this will take you then back to your home page. You can go ahead and view your observations at any time. Let me just have a quick look in the chat to answer one of those last few ones. So Katrina said, is it best to use a description such as plant, or could you use the common name or the common family name, for example? Absolutely, you can type in the common name instead of the scientific name, but obviously that does depend on the common name being in iNat. And, you know, obviously common names can be a little bit variable from place to place, but in a lot of cases, common names do exist. And if a common name is missing, you can flag that taxon and ask for its addition at any time. So, you know, just as a random example, obviously I can type in wattle, and then you will have wattles for acacia pop up, right? And I can type in parrots, and then I'll have parrots appear. So you can absolutely type in common names. Chat officer said, is it just using the front photo or all the photos you uploaded? Thinking the front photo might need to be the best. Yes, that's a very good point, that when you are getting the computer vision suggestion, it is only working on that first photo. So if you wanted to see what the computer vision is suggesting for other photos, do it before you combine them. So for example, if I just go back in here and I load these back in, if I wanted to see what the computer vision was suggesting for each of these 3 photos, I would just do it now before I actually combine the 3 of them together. And so you can kind of do it for each one. But yes, that's a good point. And yeah, generally I like to put the best or the most representative photo as the first one. That maybe it includes flowers, fruit, and the most important diagnostic characters. So that covers all the fundamentals of uploading. So pretty straightforward. But then you have this entire world of amazing data to use. So you can go ahead and view your own observations at any time. So here are my observations, and there are all kinds of amazing ways to filter them, which I can go through with you now. You can also view other people's records at any time. So for example, I'll go to a bookmark I have for all Australian records, and you can see at the moment there are almost 12 million records on iNaturalist across Australia. And if we swap to the map view, you can see they cover everywhere. So even down to around our Macquarie Island, Antarctic territories down here, you've even got points down on Heard and McDonnell Islands. So if we do a bounding box around there, you can see there are a whole bunch of seabird records from down at Heard, and seals, fish. Or you can explore the world, of course. And at the moment across the world, there are about 270 million records. But I'll show you how to filter records because, of course, in many cases, you may be interested in what is near you in some of your reserves to inform just your weekend walk, or perhaps you want to go out and you're doing seed collecting, or you're interested in taking photos to write a field guide. Whatever the case may be, iNaturalist has an extremely powerful set of data filters that you can use in all kinds of amazing combinations. So what we'll do is we'll filter to Western Australia, and we'll filter to plants. So we'll go to Western Australia, and you'll notice that there's this main species bar here. So at the moment, for all of Western Australia, there's just shy of 1 million records. And we'll go ahead and we'll type in just plants for now. And you'll see we've got 365,000 records. So a decent number, probably around 40% of all iNat records from WA at the moment are plants. Now you've got the grid view where you can go down, and it's in a 4 by 24 grid. So you've got 96 records per page, and we'll scroll all the way down, and then you'll see it's paginated. We go back up. You can also view that in list mode, where it gives a little bit more detail for each one. It tells you a location, when it was added, when it was observed, who the user was. You've also, as I already showed, have a map view where you can go down on the map at any point. You have some basic subsetting tools on the map in addition to more complex ones, which I'll show in a second. But if all you're interested in is just a box or a circle, then you can very easily just draw a bounding box at any time to just retrieve that subset of records. You can also don't have to look at it in satellite view. You've also got your basic street map view, and you also have OpenStreetMap view. But I just like to have it on satellite. You've got your observations tab, which will obviously show you individual records, which you can then click on any individual given record, and that will then take you to that individual observation. But we'll go back to Western Australia. But you've also got your species tab. So if I go here, I can see at the moment more than 9,000 plant species have been recorded for WA on iNat. It will be ordered in descending order from most observed to least observed, but it will only show the top 1,000. So if I'm looking at all plants for WA at the moment, I'll only be able to see the top 1,000 most observed plants until I filter it down to finer taxonomic levels. But you can see here, the most observed plant for WA on iNat currently is Calladenia flava. And you can see actually there are quite a lot of orchids in the top ones, as well as some of the more charismatic Proteaceae and Drosera as well. You've got your identifiers tab, which tells you who is adding identifications. Of course, you have many identifiers who are amateur naturalists, but there are also many identifiers, in increasing number so, who are professional botanists and taxonomists. So even just looking at this list here, for example, we've got Thilo Kruger, who is a PhD, and perhaps some of you have attended talks by Thilo. He is a carnivorous plant expert based at Curtin University, exceptionally knowledgeable. You've got people like Russell Barrett, who is based in New South Wales currently, but has tremendous experience in Western Australia as a botanist and used to be at the Perth Herbarium and Kings Park. People like Tim Hammer, for example, who again, he's based at Adelaide, but he has a huge amount of experience with Tylotus and Herbaceae in Western Australia. And so there are lots of interesting people, very knowledgeable people who are adding identifications. You can also look at the observers and see who is uploading records from WA, both ordered by number of observations, but then also ordered by number of species. So just to give you a sense of who is uploading records and where. So for example, we can see at the moment, the person with easily the most plant species recorded in WA is Jeff Byrne, who actually used to work as a doctor, and him and his wife went all around Western Australia and collected thousands of plant specimens that are all deposited at the Perth Herbarium. And each of those physical vouchers is associated with a photographic set that he has now completely uploaded onto iNaturalist. So if we filter to his plant records, you can see all of these amazing image sets are all also associated with herbarium specimens held at Perth. So quite a remarkable set of data with very, very high value. Then you have a tremendous set of amazing, powerful filters. Now, you can do these via the filter box, but you can also do this by directly modifying the URL. So all the basic filters are just here in this filter box. And you can do things like only look at research grade records, for example. So on iNaturalist, I already mentioned casual grade as one of the grades, but you've also got two other main grades, which is research grade and needs ID. So if something is just uploaded to iNaturalist, and we can use my observations as examples, let's use this one, and then we will use this one. So here, for example, is a record that I uploaded. I've identified it to species, but no one else has come along yet and confirmed it. So it is still labeled as needs ID. Similarly, even if someone else has come along and added IDs, if my record is at a level below species, it will be needs ID. But here is a record where we've got two IDs. They're both in agreement with each other. And so it's labeled as research grade. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is correct. It doesn't mean that it will be used in research. It's just a way of indicating confidence of identification. And it also just indicates that at least two people have added an ID and that more than 2/3 of them agree on the ID. So the identification works on a consensus system. So you need 2 out of 2 in agreement for it to be research grade, or 3 out of 3, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 6, and so on and so forth. So what it does mean is at any point, identifications can be corrected and amended anywhere down the line. So there are records where, I added an ID 5 years ago, and then someone comes along tomorrow and says, oh, actually, you've made a mistake, and they're able to correct it at any time. So all identifications are entirely dynamic and can be checked and corrected at any time whatsoever. So there's those kind of filters. You can just filter down to one person. So for example, we can filter down to just my particular records from Western Australia. So you can see I've got just over 6,000 records of plants from Western Australia across about 2,000 species. I can filter it by photo licensing. I can filter it by when it was added in terms of the date or when it was observed. I can filter it down to specific dates and times. So let's say I'm in Western Australia and I'm just interested in the genus Divesia. Okay, I've filtered down to that. There's about 3,000. But I'm also only interested in Divesia that have been observed during the summer months. So I can go ahead into the months bar and I can just click January, February, and December. So now I'm just looking at summer Divesia. Let's say I'm also only interested in ones that have already been identified to species. I can go ahead and in this rank filter, I can set the high to species. So it means that I'm only getting things at species in a finer level. And you can see I've now filtered down to 126 records that are identified to at least species for Divesia in the summer months for Western Australia. And so that I can go ahead and look in the map and I can interrogate any of these records individually. And I can scroll down and I can look through all of those. I can see who the identifiers are, and we can see the top identifier for these is DeVito, who is Mike Crisp, who is the authority on Divesia in Australia. So you know that a lot of these identifications are probably pretty good quality. On top of that, however, you can also do all of these other amazing filters through direct editing of the URL. So what I'll do here is I'll swap to a New South Wales view just for this. So we'll go to New South Wales. We'll do Divesia again. But let's say that you are interested in, say, seed collecting, and you only are going to have a very limited window to go out. You don't have a lot of time. You're very busy this spring. So you want to check beforehand at what times your target groups are actually going to have fruit. And so you want to go on and see when other people are observing these taxa with fruits, so you can go and match your sampling time to that. Well, I say, okay, I've filtered down to Divisia, I've filtered down to New South Wales. Now I want to try and find records that have specifically been annotated as fruiting. How do I do this? Well, you can directly modify the URL. If we click into the URL here, you'll see that there are multiple strings of text. Now, obviously it just starts off with the usual stuff, but then there are two particular strings of text. The first one here is place_ID equals 6825. Now, in iNaturalist, 6825 is the code for New South Wales. So every place has a unique identifying number. And then similarly, we have taxon_ID equals 139296, which is the unique identifying number for Divisia. So every taxon at every rank also has a unique identifying number. What we can do now is then string further text onto it to filter down. So there is a huge amount, and I'll pop this into the chat. And I'll answer your question in 1 second, Katrina. But what we can do is we can go ahead to here, and we'll go ahead and copy this, and I'll explain what I'm doing in 1 second. So now what I did is I have now filtered down to Divisia in New South Wales that have been explicitly annotated as having fruit present on the plant. And the way I did that was I added these two extra strings of text. So every time you add another string, you have to use the ampersand to separate it from the previous strings. And then first what I did was term_ID equals 12, because in this case, 12 is the code for flowers and fruits. And then I added another ampersand, and then I added term_value_ID equals 14, because 14 is the value for fruits or seeds. Now, you don't have to remember all of these. They're all in this very handy wiki document here, which I linked in the text. But you can now see going down through, these are observations that if you were to click through all the photos, they all have fruit in them. So we can filter that down even further. And let's just go Divisia ulicifolia. And I can see exactly when, so we can go ahead and go, let's just say months. And we'll go, is this fruiting in October? And I go, wow, there are 73 observations of this species that have fruit in October. Now, how did this information, this fruiting information get added? This is through something called annotations. And you can do this on your own records. You can do this on other people's records. And most of the annotations on Divisia are actually just done by one guy who has gone through in his spare time and just annotated tens of thousands of Divisia records. So here I am on this particular record, this goodenia that I observed. If I scroll down on the right-hand side, you will see there is this section that says annotations. And here I can add information. So I can say, yes, I have flowers. There are flowers present in my photo. So I've just now added that annotation. So if I was to then go ahead and do that same filtering and searching, and I searched for goodenia, or I searched for goodenia rotundifolia with flowers, this would now appear in that search. I can similarly, obviously where it's relevant, I can select whether the plant is female or male. If it was an animal, for example, so let's say I go to a possum record. Here's a brush-tailed possum that I photographed. You'll see I get different annotations. I can say whether it was alive or dead. I can say what the presence was. So was it the organism itself, or was it a scat, track, egg, bone? I can do life stage, and I can also do sex. And so these annotations will differ depending on the organism. So some groups have very specific ones. So for example, if I go to one of my dragonfly records, they have some very specific annotations. Let's go to one of my adult ones. So I can actually select something as specific as, say, teneral. So those are for individuals that have just molted and they haven't hardened up yet. But each of them will have unique sets of annotations. And you can also look at the individual species pages. So not only can you look at obviously individual records, but every species has its own page. So if I typed in Waratah, instead of clicking View Observations, I can click About. And here you get taken to the main profile page, and I can see photos, I can see some stats. You go down here, you've got a map. You've got the About tab, which is text which gets automatically imported from a Wikipedia page if it exists. It shows the full taxonomy of that particular species. It tells you whether it has conservation status. But very importantly, it also has these amazing charts. So here you can see, okay, I want to go out, I want to photograph waratahs. When's the best time of year? Well, it's probably going to be in this period, August to November. Now, why is that? You think, well, it should be present all the time. It's a shrub. If we look at the flowers and fruits, you can see that the peak in flowering is around September and October. So this is a really powerful tool that allows you to inform your searches for plants or animals based on their phenology or on their life history. So a very, very cool example that I always like to use is the pasture day moth. So they have this very constrained life cycle, where if you look at the life stage annotations, you can see they are completely, almost completely, and this one is, these are a couple of mis-IDs which I'll have to correct, but the life stages are completely non-overlapping. So you will have the adults here in March to May, and they are present then. And then the adults will lay eggs, they will hatch. You then get the caterpillars appear from June to October. And then when the caterpillars pupate, this particular species actually pupates underground. And so there are currently no observations of pupae, but that occurs from November through to February. And you can see that's completely blank on the phenology chart. And then in March, the adults appear again. So you have this really superb illustration of exactly when the different life stages of this particular species are present. So as I said, you can go ahead and you can explore data from anyone, from anywhere in the world. You don't even have to use the data. You can just browse photos and live vicariously through other people. So for example, if I go to Western Australia and we type in plants, and then a nice way you can often do is where it says sort by, I change it to faves. And this will show you the most favorited observations by different people. So you can see some really remarkable records and very, very impressive photographs. So if we scroll down, you can see, well, there's plenty of orchids, no surprises there. But you can see here, one of the most favorited Western Australian plant records is this wonderful Eastern Queen of Sheba. You've got a really, really nice Stylidium from Tilo from near Perth. You've got some fantastic photos of Utricularia. And then you've got some great, good contrast between the white background technique and the black background technique. But it's very easy to access these photographs, these data at any point. Now, it's very easy to download data as well. So if we go back to my observations, and then let's say we filter down to just dragonflies, you can go to the filters box, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see there's a download button. I can click on that, and this will take me to the export screen. And I can go ahead, I can choose lots of different columns and values, and I can click create export, and that will actually download a CSV, a spreadsheet for me. So it's very easy to download the data at any point into a very nice usable spreadsheet format. All right, so thanks, Cam, answering Katrina's question. So very, very easy at any point. And in fact, you don't even need to have an account to be able to browse other people's data. So obviously you need an account to be able to upload your own records, but to just use iNat to look at photos, to look at data at any point, you do not even need to be logged in. You do not need to have an account. It is all completely open and freely accessible. And that's probably a good segue to talk about the ALA as well. So the Atlas of Living Australia, as Australia's national biodiversity database, it is a data aggregator. So data from all kinds of data providers, all of Australian organisms, filter into the ALA. So this includes things like herbaria, museums, places like BirdLife that contribute survey data, and also citizen science platforms like iNaturalist or like Frog ID. So iNaturalist is one of them, where records feed into the ALA, but not all records go into the ALA. That's important to recognize that you have to make sure that your records are correctly licensed, because the ALA will not accept records or images that are licensed as all rights reserved. Now, by default, when you sign up for an account, your records should be CC BY NC, which does allow them to go into the ALA. But if you're unsure at any time, you can check your licensing by just going to your profile and then clicking the blue Edit Account Settings button. Then you would go to Content and Display, and you'll see there's a licensing section. And you can check your observations have their own license, your photos have their own license, and your sound recordings have their own license. You can change them at any time, so you can see all the options here. So this bottom one here that says all rights reserved, that is the only option that will not allow your records to go into the ALA. So keeping in mind, if you want your data to be accessible and to be exported into the ALA and usable by researchers or conservationists there, then you have to select one of the other options. If you are, say, a professional photographer and you are selling your images elsewhere and you want to retain them as all rights reserved, that's completely okay. You can set all rights reserved just for your images, but you can set a less restrictive license for the records themselves. The records will go into the ALA, but the images will stay within iNaturalist. And keeping in mind, if you do change your licensing at any time and you want it to apply retrospectively to your existing records, you just need to tick these checkboxes. Otherwise, it will only apply to your records going forward. And you'll also notice as well that they have these other tags. So as well as going into the ALA, your records can also go into GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It is effectively the global version of the ALA. And in fact, the ALA is the Australian node of GBIF. And so again, there are only a certain subset of copyright licenses that allow your records to go into GBIF. That subset is more restrictive than the ALA. And then there is also another subset, which is Wikimedia. So if you want your photographs to potentially be used in Wikipedia articles, then you would need to choose one of these licenses with the blue tag. So I'll talk about now, so we've got about half an hour left. We'll talk about photos at the end, but we'll also talk about projects. So projects are a very powerful tool in iNaturalist that allows you to collate and organize records that have some kind of unifying theme or themes. So this can be taxonomic, it can be geographic based, it can be anything and everything in between. So to illustrate this, I'll show you a few examples of projects. So one of the biggest and most successful projects on iNat, not just in Australia, but in the entire world, is Australasian fishes. So this is a particular project that collects records of fishes, sharks, and rays from Australia and New Zealand. So if we go down and we look at the map, you can see it collects everything from Australia and New Zealand and their sovereign waters. And you can see that there are almost 500,000 records here across 3,500 species. Now, this is a tremendously, as I said, successful project. It has led to at least 10 scientific papers being published. There are multiple books that have been published, including one which I just published myself a few months ago. We just recently published a complete 750-page field guide to every fish known from Sydney Harbour. And in the book, we used more than 2,500 photographs taken from this project on iNaturalist across more than 350 citizen scientists. One of the reasons that the project is so successful is that there are a tremendous amount of experts contributing their time and knowledge to identifying the records. So the project was started by Mark Magrutha, who used to be the curator of fishes at the Australian Museum. And he has tirelessly worked over the last 8 or 9 years on the project. And a huge number of fish taxonomists and fish experts from all around Australia now actively use iNaturalist and this project and help add identifications to people's fish records. So this particular project is an example of something called a collection project. So these are the two main types of project, collection and traditional. Collection projects are automatic. So they just automatically collate records without you having to do anything, as long as those records fulfill the filters that have been set up. So in this particular case for Australasian fishes, we can see what are the filters? Well, there are these fish filters set up as the taxonomic filters. There are these location filters. And then it has to be either research grade or needs ID. So as long as you upload a record that's identified as a fish or a shark or a ray, it's from Australia or New Zealand or their waters, and it's research grade or needs ID, your record will automatically appear in this project without you having to do anything. So there are lots of examples of these types of project. Another one is, for example, the Flora of Australia project. So this is currently collecting all plant records across all of Australia and its territories. So Christmas Island, Cocos Islands, Macquarie Island, Norfolk, Lord Howe, and it's collecting all plant records. So those are collection projects. So you can join them and your records will just be automatically added to them. They'll still be automatically added even if you don't join the project. But then you've got a second type called traditional projects. And those are the ones that require manual addition. And a really good example to demonstrate this is the Roadkill project. So these are projects that collate records that are based on some kind of unifying theme that there isn't really an automatic filter for. So for example, it isn't necessarily possible for the computer to know that you've uploaded a photo of roadkill because the animal might not necessarily appear to be obviously dead. It might not have a road in the background. So it's not always something that's straightforward. So this is a human decision that needs to be made. So in this case, you manually add it. Now, the two main strengths of traditional projects is that A, you can obviously have great flexibility for which records you are manually adding to it. But you can also add these extra observation fields, and I'll go through those in a second. But you can see here, this particular project covers roadkill in Australia. It has over 13,000 records, which obviously is simultaneously quite sad, but also very valuable data. And this, again, is a great example of a project that is actively being used in management and conservation. And there are multiple councils in Australia, particularly at the moment in New South Wales and Victoria, that check this project to see which species are being killed on our roads and where, and actually implementing things like wildlife fences, changing speed limits on particular stretches of road directly in response to these data. So how do you add your records to a traditional project? So let's say we'll use bandicoot as an example. So here is a road-killed bandicoot that I photographed the other day. So here's a road-killed bandicoot that I photographed a couple of days ago. Unfortunately, what I would do is I would go down to this project bar and I would start to type in the name of the project and it would then appear in the list. And in this particular case, I've got it here. So now that I've just shown you the road-killed bandicoot, we'll go to just one of my plant records and we'll pretend it's a road-killed bandicoot. So let's say I've got this road-killed bandicoot. I want to add it to the project. I would just go down here. I would start to type in the name. I've got my project that I've joined already. I then get this pop-up. And so now is my chance to add this extra data. So before I showed you how to add something called annotations, which was things like life stage, phenology, and sex. Those are standardized. But you also have these additional data fields called observation fields, and these are completely customizable. So there are more than 17,000 of them that exist at the moment, and you can make anything you imagine to suit your data needs. So in this particular case as well, you'll notice that each of them has a little pink asterisk. That means it's a mandatory field. So it will not allow me to add this record to the roadkill project until I have filled out these 4 data fields. So here I can say how fresh the roadkill was. I have a free form text where I can talk about so let's say I go, okay, this thing was freshly killed. I can say the habitat was eucalypt forest. I can then click the speed limit of the road, or I can say unknown. And then there's an option for if it was a marsupial, was there pouch young, or was it a non-marsupial? And then once I've added those, I just click the add button for each of them, and then it will allow me to click add to project. And then anyone who is accessing that project can now download those extra observation fields in their spreadsheet. And it's a very powerful way of collecting additional metadata. So as just another example, you've got, if I can remember the name of the project, wild pollinator count. So here are some of my observations that I have added to the wild pollinator count project. You can scroll down and you can see observation fields. So it talks about what was the name of the host plant. Was this during an official count period? Was the plant a native or a non-native? So you have this huge amount, this rich amount of information that you can add. You can add observation fields as well to your records at any time. That doesn't have to be as part of a project. You can append that extra information. And People do that regularly. So for example, any of my gall records or my leaf miner records, for example. So often with plant diseases, leaf miners, galls, it's very useful to have host plant information. So here, this is a particular leaf mining moth. And you can see down here, I've got an observation field that says host plant ID. So that actually, if people click on this, you can actually see all the records that have that particular value. So this is all the records that someone has put host ID is Brainia oblongifolia coffee bush for. And I can go through and you can see most of them are for this particular leaf mining moth. So it's very, very easy to append this data and then use those fields to search for those records in a highly customizable way. So you can create projects at any time. There are minimum requirements. You have to have at least 50 records before you can create a traditional project. But once you do that, you can have a project up and running. I have many, many projects that I have joined, or that, so you can see I've got 12 pages here of these projects that cover all kinds of interesting things. You know, some are very niche. For example, here is a project for when you observe species that have iNaturalist in the background. So this is a meta iNaturalist project where, for example, so you have lots of very niche and kind of whimsical projects that can be made. There is, for example, observations on or near signs. I believe, let me see if I can find this one.
Hey, Thomas,
Yes.
I'm just thinking in terms of for all of our Landcare groups on here. Do you think
Yes.
you'd be able to show us how, for example, they might be able to set up a project to do like an ongoing yearly BioBlitz survey for their patch of bush that they look after?
Yeah, absolutely. So once you
Awesome.
have set up, once you've got your 50 observations and you kind of got a good sense of how iNaturalist works, you go up here and you go to community and you'll see the drop down, there'll be projects. Now you have to, and then we'll go start a project. And this is where you have to make a little bit of a decision whether you want to do it as a collection project or a traditional project, because there's pros and cons. Now, for a collection project, you would have a set of filters in mind. So as an example of one of mine, we can show this particular project, which is Watergora Reserve. Is it this particular one? Yes, it is. So here is a survey that I did a while back for a local reserve. And it's this one. And it's just a collection project. And what I did was I imported a place. So previously I showed you that you can search for any place. So if I go to explore, I can search for a place in this location bar here. And this will search Google Maps effectively. So obviously I can type in something like a state, or I can type in something like a town. And if you go to the map, you'll show there'll be an area delineated. But this search bar is directly searching Google Maps. And so a lot of particular borders or boundaries that you're interested in may not be there. What can you do? Two things. One is you can go to filters and you can search in this place bar instead. This will search for very specific boundaries that someone has explicitly imported. So here is this very particular area that I imported for this very specific reserve in Sydney that you can't get the proper borders off through Google Maps. So here, what you need is a KML file. So you can easily create one of those in Google Earth or a program like GIS. You basically just draw a polygon around your area. You can then create a place and import that into iNaturalist, or you can get a curator like myself to do it for you. And then you can start using that as a filter. Now, so that can be the basis of your project. And so if you wanted to create a collection project, that's very easy to do. You just click the big green Get Started button for your collection project. You would type in a project name. You've got a description. You can have a banner image and a little thumbnail. You then set up your requirements. So I might say, well, I'm interested in surveying birds in my particular reserve. I'm doing it from Watagora Reserve, and I only want the records that are from myself. And you can do all of these filters. You can also set exclusion filters. So I can say, well, I want to record birds, but I'm not interested in the parrots. So it's going to be recording all birds, but not parrots. Lots of different filters. So you can just go through and set these to whatever you'd like, and then you just click done, and it just creates your project. So it would take probably a whole nother workshop to go through all the small nuances of creating projects, but effectively, in a nutshell, you just need a project name, a little bit of a project description saying what the project is about, and then you need a set of filters. So if you have a reserve that you're going to be surveying and you just want to collect all your records in that particular reserve, then you can just make sure that you import the boundaries into iNaturalist of that reserve, set it as your place filter, and away you go. And that is literally what I have for this particular one. All I have is just vascular plants as my filter, with a few exclusions of things that are planted in this reserve because I only wanted wild plants. And then I've just set it to be this particular location. And you can see it just automatically collects all those records for me, right? And I didn't have to do anything. But sometimes this may not work out for you. And it may not work out for you if you're dealing with threatened species. So if you know you're going to be encountering threatened species in your particular area and your area of focus, and you're going to have like a spatial filter, and your area is very small, you probably need to do a traditional project. So let's say I have my reserve here. So this reserve is about 25 hectares. It's very small. And let's say I observed a threatened species in the reserve. It gets its location obscured on iNat because it's a sensitive species. What happens is, remember, a randomly generated set of coordinates, they will be bounced out of the place. And so the project won't know that those coordinates are inside your place because the project is operating on that public coordinates, i.e. the randomly generated set, rather than the true coordinates. So if you anticipate that you'll have a lot of threatened species in your survey, in your reserve, and you needed to set up a spatial filter to only collect records from that place, then it's probably best to set up a traditional project, which you do the same way. You go to projects, you go to start a project, but then you scroll down and it's this little blue hyperlink here at the bottom. Don't ask me why it doesn't have a big green button like the others, but you just click that blue hyperlink and it's pretty much the exact same thing. You just give it a title, you give the project a description. There's a few other little things you can tick if you want, but then you can just go ahead and click create. And it just means you have to manually add records to it one by one. An alternative to that is you can do what I did here, which is you can actually create two projects and then put them in an umbrella. So here I have two individual projects. I have this one, which has the bulk of the records, which are the ones that are just automatically going in based on the place and the taxon. I then have this separate one, which is for my orchids from the reserve. I obscured all of my orchids from this particular reserve. So I created a second project to which I had to manually add those 27 individual records. I then created a third project, which is a special type of collection project called an umbrella. And instead of collecting individual records, it collects other projects. And so in the filters, instead of placing some kind of spatial or taxonomic filter, the filters are actually the names of other projects. So you can see here, it has actually collected my two other projects. And you can see on the map, if you look carefully, you've got all the records in the reserve as they should be, but then you'll see there are all these other random scattered points all around Sydney. Those are my obscure ones, and those are the randomly generated points. So a few options there, but fundamentally, if you want to set up some kind of survey, then the multiple steps are, presumably you'll be doing it based on some kind of place. So first of all, search to see if that place exists or not. So you can search in this search bar up here. So let's say I go, oh, I wonder if Watagora Reserve has a place. And I go, aha, yes, it does. So I don't need to create one. But then I go, I wonder if Barren Mountain has a place already. And I go, well, possibly there are some various places that have the words barren and mountain, but they may not be the one I'm after. So I could check each of these, see if it's the one I'm interested in. If not, I just go, okay, under this more menu, there's places. Then I can go add a new place under the maps. And this is where I would give the place a name. The parent would just be the state usually. So you could put in Western Australia as the parent. And then you would just choose your KML file. So I guess, yeah, we've got 15 minutes. I can very, very quickly show you this. You can literally just go into Google Earth to create a KML at any point. So just use Google Earth directly in your browser, the free version. Don't use the one you have to download or pay. You just go new. So top left-hand corner, new, new project. Then you just go to this tool, which has the connected dots, which says add path or polygon. I can scroll in, and let's say I'm surveying this little bush patch, and I'm just going to do this very roughly. And I'm going to draw a polygon around this place just with my mouse. I'll close it. And then we go save to project, the blue save to project button over here. That's done. I've got untitled polygon over here. I can move the chat out of the way. Now I have to remember because they recently changed. Google Earth completely changed the button. So there used to be a button here that just said save as KML, but presumably they've moved it to one of these options. Oh, actually, I probably have to do it here. Okay, here we go. Export as KML. There we go. So here, I've now exported that as a KML. And so that will save that polygon. And then so I just go back to my place and I just import that KML file and it will import that polygon into iNaturalist. There are some limits. It can't be bigger than 700,000 square kilometers, which I assume most people will not exceed. And it can't already contain more than 200,000 observations, which again is probably pretty unlikely if you're just doing a small reserve. And yeah, so that would be step one. So you would create that place. If it doesn't already exist in iNaturalist, it's best to avoid duplication. And so make sure you search for the place name beforehand. You would create that place, you would import it. You would go to then projects, as I mentioned, in that community member menu, start a project, collection project, get started. And then here you would type in the name of your place into that place bar. And then if you're interested in surveying everything in the reserve, then you would leave that taxon filter blank. But if you are only interested in plants, for example, we can go ahead and set that to plants. You can then go ahead and set it to particular users. So let's say it was a pretty popular reserve that a lot of people go to, but I'm thinking I only want my own records in this particular project. Then you can just go ahead and just put yourself, but then you can keep adding people. So let's say you've got a team of 5 people that are all going to be surveying your reserve. You can just add those 5 users as filters. And then remember as well, as I said, we can exclude things. So you can say, I don't really care about Proteaceae, so I can exclude Proteaceae in this case. And it's very simple to do. Or you can just go ahead and string together a few. So you're saying, okay, well, we're actually only going to be surveying 3 genera in there. And so we're just going to set those 3. So you can do that as well. So you can string together as many of these filters as you like, as many of these exclusion filters. There's a few other little tick boxes here. So for a BioBlitz, for example, so it's very easy to set up a BioBlitz doing this as well. Let's say you wanted to do this reserve. You were doing it for these 3 genera. You were doing it just for these 3 people, but it was just for this one weekend that you were doing a BioBlitz. Well, you can go set here and you can say, okay, I'm going to set it to be the 30th. Just make sure you delete the time and just have the full dates. And so now this will only collect records from that exact weekend. And so it's just a really nice self-contained way of filtering down to those particular records. And so then after you've clicked done, you don't have to do anything for a collection project. All of those records will just start automatically populating that project based on all of those filters you've done.
Yeah,
But,
so like kind of the way that I understand it as well, just for, I think for someone who's also in a friends of group, like, so with the collection project, you're kind of setting up the infrastructure, and then people will just go out and the projects will just kind of automatically come in if they fall in those categories. But if you set up the traditional one, it's like people are going to have to actually manually go in and do the observations and put in the location, if that makes sense. So it just depends on how you kind of want to set up the infrastructure of the project.
Absolutely. So yes, the collection projects are designed for ease and automation, and it's just a very, very simple way of collecting things. Whereas traditional projects, yes, they require more manual work, but they also allow more flexibility with what you can add. So, for example, there's a project on iNaturalist that just involves observations of feathers, not the birds themselves. So of course that's something that would be impossible with a collection project because there is no filter for just feathers here. Whereas you can, obviously a person can recognize a photograph is just of a feather and can add it to that project. So ultimately it just comes down to what your specific needs and goals are for that project. And I'm always very happy to discuss the pros and cons of each. But yeah, so there's just a few minutes left, so I thought I might just give some general photography tips and advice, because that's probably one of the biggest things on iNaturalist that is a hurdle to identifying records, is not having the correct photographs and not capturing enough features. So plants are a good example to use, and just generally, of course, you want to photograph as many features as you possibly can. So that's, if you have no idea what something is, you want to hedge your bets and just take as many photos as you can, because that will maximize the chances that you will record features that are diagnostic. So for example, we can see at this Asteraceae that I photographed the other day. So one photograph, okay, I've got top down of the flowers. Next one, I've got a side-on photo that shows the bracts. I've then got a photo from a slightly different angle, which shows the bracts underneath a bit more. I've got the seed head. I've got a handful of individual seeds in my hand. I've got the basal rosette of the plant. And then I've flipped over a leaf to see the underside as well. But this is going to differ, of course, right, from taxa to taxa. So here's a Pultonea. I've now got a close-up of a flower. Here's one with the sepals behind the flower. A different one, I've got leaves, I've got stipules, I've got one showing more branchlets. So generally, the advice I give for plants is to have a basic set of kind of 7 to 8 photographs if you don't know what something is. Now, of course, the key thing is once you learn the rules, you can break them. But if you're starting off at a level where you're not sure what you're dealing with, or you just generally want to obviously maximize the amount of information, this is the list that I would recommend for plants, and which I always try to do for myself. So first of all is a photo of the whole plant. Now, this is one of the most important photos you can take, but often it's one that's very much neglected. So you take a photograph of the whole plant. Why is this important? Well, first of all, it shows you what the growth habit of the plant is. So is it a tree? Is it a shrub? Is it a herb? Is it a creeper? All can be really important information for ID. It also tells you about the habit of the plant. So is it erect? Is it prostrate? Is it weeping? Again, all can be really useful information. It then also shows you the habitat and the soil, and it shows you potentially other similar associated species nearby. So that one shot of the whole plant packs in a huge amount of information. Obviously, you then want fertile material if it is present. So you want fruits. If you are licensed to do so, of course, and you're able, you may like to cut open a fruit, because often seeds can be really important for identification. But again, keeping in mind, if you're on private property or if you're licensed to do so, it's not a good idea to go around and just opening fruits and flowers in national parks, of course. But fruit, if it's present. Flowers, always get photographs of flowers from above and below. That is one of the biggest things that people often don't photograph with plants, is below the flowers, because the sepals, the bracts, peduncle, all of those morphological characters are often really, really important. So if you have a genus like, say, Senecio, many Senecio species have extremely similar flowers when looking from above. They're just basic yellow ray florets around inner yellow disc florets, and it can be very hard to identify them. But when you get to look at the bracts, that can actually be a lot more useful information. So if flowers are present, and it's a, you know, a relatively 2D flower above and below. But then if you have a flower or a inflorescence that is kind of 3D, then above, below, and from the side can be very helpful as well. If you do have an inflorescence, so something like a Banksia or a Grevillea or a Petrophile, not just getting a photo of the whole flower head, but also the individual florets and flowers in that inflorescence can also be very important as well. So you have to kind of change your thinking. A lot of people kind of treat an inflorescence as one big flower when it's actually composed of many individual flowers. And so getting a photo of the whole flower spike, but then also individual flowers can be very important. Then, of course, we've got our leaves. And again, this is a case of leaf above and leaf below, because in many cases, the top and the bottom of a leaf may be different colors. The venation may be different. You may have hairs on one side of the leaf, but no hairs on the other. On the underside of a leaf, you may have structures called demacia, particularly in rainforest plants. All of this, again, can be crucial information for making identifications. So you get a photograph of the top of the leaf and the underside of a leaf. The other handful of photographs you can take as well is one of a whole branchlet. So like in this photograph, for example, this just gives you a good sense often of, are the leaves alternate or opposite? And it shows you, are the branchlets weeping? Are they erect? Are they held at 90 degrees to the plant? Trunks are important, obviously, for trees and shrubs. So to get a sense of the bark, if you have a particularly large tree, like say a eucalypt, it can be useful to get photos of the bark at the base of the tree, as well as in the upper branches. If it differs, if it's the same bark throughout, then no real need. And then also a photo of the branchlets, because this will show you where the leaves attach to the plant. It will show you hairs on the branchlets, and it will potentially show you stipules if they're present. So all of those things are shown in this particular photo here. I can see the branchlets are hairy. I can see that there are stipules present at the leaf bases, and I can also see how the leaves attach to the plant. I can see these leaves are alternate. They're not opposite, or at least they're subopposite. And I can see that each of the leaves has a short petiole as well. And then the final one you may like to do, particularly for things like grasses, I highly recommend, is having some kind of measuring card or thing for scale in the photo. So if you're photographing grasses, sedges, rushes, any of those graminoid taxa, or often things like Asteraceae with their achenes and their cypsella, so the fruit of the Asteraceae, I highly recommend. So I just have a little paper measuring card that I keep a few of in my pocket. So you can order these online. You can print them off yourself. It's got a little color standard on it. It's got a little ruler. And I put things like Asteraceae fruit, grass flowering spikes, because many of these groups require measurements of particular. Another really important one is acacia. So if any of you have ever used the acacia key before, you'll notice that measurements of phyllodes, of peduncles, things like that are actually quite an important character. So as a summary of that for plants, you want to get 1, a photo of the whole plant. 2, photo of fruit if present. 3, photograph of a flower from above if present. 4, flower from beneath. 5, leaf from above. 6, leaf from below. 7, the bark or trunk. 8, a close-up of a branchlet showing the stem, the leaf attachment, stipules. There are then 1,000 other photos you can also take, depending on the group. You can take things like roots, leaf bases, leaf margins, all kinds of things, detailed images of things like stamens and ovary and things you have to dissect the flower for. But if you take those 8 basic photos, then that will give you the best shot across all plants, if you have no idea what you're dealing with, of getting the best identification. Obviously, if you know that something is an acacia or you know that something is a Banksia, you'll then know those more specific features that you need to focus on. But if you just have this plant that you encounter, you don't know what it is, or you just want to maximize the info, those 8 photographs are always a really safe bet. And the good thing about plants is they don't run away. So if provided you have the time, of course, you can sit there and you can take the time to actually get those careful images. Whereas, of course, things like birds and insects, you may only get one shot before something flies away. I think that's the main advice, because obviously I assume many of you will be working with plants. For things like fungi, just make sure you get the top of the fungus and also the underside of the fungus, because that will show you, does it have gills? Does it have pores? And also that habitat shot is also a really important one for the fungi, because it will show you what it is on. For things like insects, again, it can be difficult to know what to photograph, so just getting photos of as many features as you can. Again, similarly for birds, reptiles, things like that. For those kind of things, just maximize the number of shots. Noni said plants don't run away, but orchids sure do blow around in a breeze. That is very true. One thing I find that's definitely helpful for things like grasses, like orchids that are kind of tall and skinny and can be affected by the wind. You can either hold the base of the plant. Obviously, you want to be very careful and not handle some orchids and things like that. But if you can, holding the base of the plant, particularly for something like a grass, just laying it flat in the palm of your hand, not only does that keep it still, but also it means it will allow it to keep it in focus. So that's always a handy thing with the wind as well. You don't even necessarily have to touch the plant, but just putting your hand in the background behind the plant will often allow your camera or your phone to better focus when it is blowing around in the wind. So quite a relatively simple technique. So Michelle said, what specifically do you call those cards? They're often just called like measuring cards. So I think if you literally type in paper measuring cards or ruler cards as well, you can often find them. So you can get them printed at, say, places that print off business cards and things like that. So there's a lot of pre-done ones that you can find online, or you can print off custom ones yourself. The ones I have were given to me by Wild Orchid Watch. But yeah, they're pretty easy to find online. So if you search something along the lines of measuring cards or ruler cards, or again, it doesn't necessarily have to be one of those. You can bring a little 15-centimeter ruler, like a plastic ruler or wooden ruler into the field, or a coin or anything that just gives you a sense that you can measure it later and get a sense of scale. And Yulia said, do you have any additional advice on grass identification? Absolutely. Most important thing you can do for grasses is the flowering spike. In many cases, you don't even actually need to take photographs of the leaves or any of the vegetative material. Obviously, that can be helpful as well. The single most important thing for you to do is take photographs of the flowering spike or the seed head of the grasses, because that is what basically every single key and identification resource for grasses is based on. The other tip I can give for grasses is, again, if you have permission to collect and pull up plants, is you can pull out a bit of grass, hold it up to the sky. And that's a really useful thing you can do. So if you've got a nice blue sky, you pull up your piece of grass, and I'll just very quickly, I can show you exactly what I mean by this, because it perfectly allows you to show the structure of the grass without being distorted. So here is a chloris. This was when I was on a collecting trip in Western New South Wales. I had pulled up that flowering head and I just held it up to the sky, and now it is a perfect backdrop to show you the exact structure of this grass flowering spike. Because as I said, this is the single most important photograph you can take for grass identification. And then just the other one for grasses as well is, of course, that measuring card. Grasses are probably the most important group to have measurements of, because a lot of grass ID is heavily dependent on literally millimeter scale measurements of very small features on those grasses. So I'll probably wrap it up there. I'll just say as well that anyone is very, very welcome to contact me at any time. Please feel free. I'm sure Eve will be able to distribute my contact details, but I'll just quickly pop it in the chat here. It's just thomasmesaglio@gmail.com. Please feel free to send me an email at any time whatsoever with any questions. Always happy to answer stuff or sit down in a very extended Zoom call with people. I also regularly record tutorial videos and send them to people when they need them. So I'm always very happy to help out with any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I completely agree with all of the comments in the chat. It's been such an informative session. I think it's like, I personally use iNat just to take photos when we're out on walks for IDing stuff, but all of the functionality that you go through is just like kind of mind-blowing a bit. I can imagine everyone in the call probably feels similarly. I was also wondering if anyone on the call wants to talk to if they're thinking about using iNat to do like a fire blitz or a little survey of their patch. I imagine, Michelle, is that something maybe that you're thinking about doing? Michelle's just set up a new
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
no, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and I was just looking up, the observations have already been recorded for the reserve too, so that's been really interesting to see.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is, yeah, that's a good point, Michelle. It's a particularly useful thing if you are looking to set up surveys in a reserve or a particular location. It is just a really nice thing to have, that you can go on and see what have people already observed here, or even the other way around. So that's often a way that I'll do it, is I'll go through, I might be doing a particular survey for a consulting company. I've recorded all the stuff that I've found, but then I come back and say, okay, what can I supplement my own survey data with? Particularly if I was only able to visit a location, once a year, I'm obviously missing out on stuff that might be flowering at other times of the year, or ephemeral taxa that might not be above ground at that point. So it's just a nice way to supplement your own data, because inevitably people are going to spot stuff that you've missed. And so it's just that nice complementary tool.
Awesome. Yeah, good to hear as well, Tim. Tim says Beverly River Care Group is just getting going and keen to focus our members on useful things. Awesome. Very cool to hear. And I feel like it's I've actually been reading a bit of literature on how doing citizen science, like using iNat, is amazing for getting the community engaged on that kind of more stewardship level. Don't you agree, Thomas? Like,
Yes,
like they feel so
absolutely.
much more connected and knowledgeable about a place when they're engaging with it in this way.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big things is just, it really opens your eyes to how much diversity is actually out there under your nose. Like,
Yeah.
once you start becoming as obsessive as I do, and walking around and wanting to record everything, you'll realize how many species, like even just in your own backyard, even within literally like your house, it's amazing how many things you're sharing your space with that you never realized existed, but now you've kind of started really looking out for these things. It really opens your eyes. And I think the last little thing as well is that obviously a lot of this is very useful for surveys and recording common species and abundance data and things like that. But there's also a large opportunity to make genuine kind of groundbreaking and really important scientific discoveries. So as a very, very quick example, because I know I've gone over time, but as a very quick example, a couple of months ago, an extinct plant was just rediscovered through iNaturalist. So this is one example of many. But a bird bander was banding up in remote tropical Queensland in the Gulf of Carpentaria. They photographed a couple of plants opportunistically on the cattle grazing property they were on, put them on iNat. It turns out that the plant was a species that has been assumed to be extinct since 1967. So it was last collected 60 years ago. And it was recognized because the botanist who described the species 10 years ago from herbarium specimens is very active on iNaturalist. Tony Bean, he's one of the head botanists at Brisbane Herbarium. He recognized the plant straight away as something that was very significant. And we were then able to organize specimens to be collected from the property. They were sent to Brisbane, confirm the identification. And so that is now a plant that we now know is no longer extinct, all because someone just encountered an interesting plant. They had no idea what it was, put up the photos onto iNaturalist, and you have this really amazing outcome. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to make really valuable contributions just through being curious, uploading photos, and having them available in this publicly accessible platform that experts are able to access at any time.
So cool. Cool. Thank you so much, Thomas. And yeah, that was just an incredible session. I was thinking, everybody, with the recording, what I'll probably do is put links to key parts of the presentation that we went through today, just so it's kind of easier to find in that hour and a half. And yeah, any resources that you feel are useful, Thomas, if there's a kind of like any step-by-step guides for like, I guess you sent us that link for tagging the fruiting. That was really helpful.
So the other
yeah,
one is, there's just one more I put in. So that's actually a guide that I wrote last year and published through the ALA. So that's kind of a very broad overview of a lot of the stuff I talked about, a lot of other details in a written format. So that will hopefully be helpful for some people as well.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thank you so much today. Yeah, so I'll send out an email with resources and a link to the recording. If you're not already a member, we would love to have you. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great day. And thank you again, Thomas. That was so awesome.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. That was amazing.
No worries. I'm glad it was helpful.